Hi guys, my name is Jonathan. I come from London and I'm a student at Westminster School. Today I'm going to be talking about the Spanish-Chinese silver trade in the 16th century, what its causes were, what it was about, and I'll talk a little bit about its effects as well. I actually wrote a research paper on the topic that will be published in the full edition of the Concord Review Journal, so you'll be able to read it fully there. Firstly, let's talk about China. China is known for being the first country to introduce paper currency. Yeah, its experiment with paper currency actually started in the Song dynasty in the 11th century and was documented by Marco Polo during the Yuan dynasty in the 14th century. This experiment had continued into the Ming dynasty. In fact, paper currency was the only form of currency at that point. While this was, of course, a major innovation, there were major problems because essentially the government would print too much of the money and there would be overinflation. So paper essentially became worthless. So as a result, the people had to turn to find a new currency, and there were three main choices. It was either going to be copper, silver, or gold. There were multiple problems with copper and gold. Gold was too valuable, which meant that it was impractical for day-to-day use, while copper had certain issues with how it would be valued in terms of how you could check whether it was reliable, whether it was valid, and it was also not valuable enough. So you would have to carry around a lot of copper just to make a very small transaction. So ultimately, silver became the de facto currency of choice by the people. At first, the government didn't go along with this, but eventually they were forced to yield because in practice it was impossible to enforce it. And the ironic thing was that even though China now had a vast demand for silver in terms of its economy, there was actually very little of it in China at that time because most of the silver mines had already been used up. As a result of this, there was a need to import silver. So now we're going to come to Spain. What role does Spain play in this? So we actually need to go a bit back in time to the 16th century, sort of the earlier parts. So Spain had been in competition with Portugal, and both were trying to find a route to trade with China, which at this time was the world's biggest economy. Now, Portugal already had a route. They went around the Cape of Good Hope and they went via Macau. And so they were looking much further ahead in getting to China where Spain didn't really know what they were doing. They were further behind, they were less developed. And in a way, Spain got lucky. They backed Christopher Columbus, and Columbus thought that he was going to China, but in reality, he was sailing the opposite direction, as we know, to the American continent. And this actually gave Spain a massive economic resource because they ended up colonizing the Americas, and there was a lot of silver there. I mean, there were a lot of other things, but in terms of what we're talking about here, there was a lot of silver, particularly in mines in Potosi. So that meant that Spain had outposts in America, sort of in what would now be called Mexico. And that begs the question. So Spain has a lot of silver suddenly, and China has a lack of it. They really need it. So that makes them natural trading partners. But of course, the thing that's stopping that from happening is something called the Pacific Ocean, which at that point was impossible. It was seen as impossible to traverse. No one had really done it before. And so that meant that it took the Magellan circumnavigation, which showed how he went around the world. Well, he died along the way, but his crew made the first circumnavigation, and also an explorer named Urdaneta, who found the reverse route going from Asia to the American continent across the Pacific. That needed to happen so that the physical barrier could be cleared, which allowed trade to take place. So after that, the Spanish-Chinese silver trade took place from 1570 to around 1640 before the collapse of the Ming Dynasty meant that the trade sort of broke down. So you might be wondering, why does it matter? Why is it important to us? But actually, there's great historic significance to this event. It's really the first example of an increasingly globalized world. It was the first time that people had traversed the Pacific Ocean and the first time that trade really took place between the Asian and American continents. But more than that, this the whole thing. This is the first time that all the continents in the world had really been connected because you have Eurasia, which is now connected to America, and America's continent was now connected back to Asia. So that in itself was very important in a symbolic sense. And in terms of a direct economic impact, there was vast economic growth in China in the short term. Historians debate how much it helped in the long term, but it's for sure that there was an immediate economic boost from the influx of silver. And something else that came with the silver on the ships was arguably even more important. This was the arrival of sweet potatoes, peanuts, and maize, which led to the second agricultural revolution in China. And this is the arrival of sweet potato, which is it's a much more reliable crop than rice, which meant that it was more resistant to extreme weather events. That allowed the population of China to increase, and that's part of the reason why the population increased dramatically in the late Ming Dynasty and into the Qing Dynasty. And finally, I think we need to mention the impact on Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia served as the trading hub, sort of the place where China and Spain met up. And in terms of impacts that we can see today, the creation of the Philippines, named after King Philip of Spain, and also the formation of Manila at that point as a major trading hub. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.